Good afternoon. Greetings, peace, and power. This is another session of our six-part series on preparation for reparation. Um, Reparations, as we look at it, the doctors, and and on screen now is Dr. Clyde Winters, uh, our most esteemed doctor in the research and has on Indigenous studies. He's an anthropologist, linguist, speaks about 10 different languages. He has been in the field. He's a professor. He's been in the field for maybe 20 plus years. He is our most esteemed scholar. His research and those other doctors that have given us fantastic research, Ivan Van Sertima, Dr. Barry Fell, Wothenthal, Dr. David Imhotep. So many others have confirmed it, but this is the father of the research. This is our expert, and I'm so glad to have him on today. We're going to talk about uh, reparations and from an indigenous perspective, and because our research, his research, as well as those other doctors' research and our research, has uncovered the fact that we are indigenous people, that we have been in the Americas for centuries. And we have the artifacts, we have the evidence, and I'm going to bring Dr. Winters on, and he'll be able to elucidate and give you information that you've never had before. And we're going to bring it on home to explain to you how this is the process of how Native people, indigenous people, colonized people obtain reparations. I'm so glad to have him, and I'm going to bring him on. His microphone is on, and I am going to beg off. And Dr. Winters,
Hello, everybody.
go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. What I want to talk about today is this whole idea of reparations, but in relationship to our indigenous origins or indigenous reality. One of the things that you have to understand is that when you go before the United Nations or other courts to prove your indigenous status, you have to come from a cultural approach. And you also have to show that you have a spiritual relationship with the ancestral territory. That's a very difficult thing in relationship to African descendants because of the fact that the Europeans, the way they conducted their relationship with us is very different from how they conducted their relationship with the Mongoloid Indians. First of all, it's important to understand that African people have been coming to the United States for over 130,000 years. The earliest evidence of man in North America dates back to 130,000 years ago in California. And what we know is that these people had to have come from Africa because of the fact that we don't have any ancient hominids in the Americas dating earlier than maybe 10 or 40 or 30,000 years ago. Also, we know that the Ice Age made it impossible for man to walk from Asia into the United States. Secondly, you could not come to the United States by a land route because of the fact, by an ocean route, because of the fact that there was ice around the coast of the United States because of the Ice Age that existed here. So for at least 100,000 years, we've been here. But when we focus on North America, our home, we find in a sense that the earliest evidence of man in North America dates back only to about 15,000 years ago, except for the evidence of some mastodon bones in California 30,000 years ago. I don't want to get people confused. But let's talk about this whole idea of indigenous origins. When you talk about indigenous origins, you have to look at the tribes. And so when the Europeans came here, the European found black people. As a result, they called the people they found in the Americas Indians. And the reason they called them Indians is because of the fact that they were black, just like the Indians that they found or they were trading with in South India. It's very important to understand this. Many Europeans, they try to pretend as though, oh, he was on his way to India, so he said that they were Indians because he thought he was in India. No, he knew he wasn't in India because of the fact that you have to understand that African people have been trading back and forth with the United States for hundreds of years before the Europeans got here. In fact, the Europeans did not come here, Columbus and the rest of them, they came here with maps. And these maps they got from African people. These maps were made because of the fact that many of us assume that the European has ruled the world for the last 5,000 years. No. No. Europeans were ruled by black people in Spain up to 1492. In other words, the same year that Columbus discovered America was the year that the Moors were forced out of Spain. Prior to 1492, there was constant interaction between black people, African people in the Americas, and African people in Africa. Columbus had maps. He knew that he was going to reach a land. This was not all hypothetical. You can read all of the texts of the Spanish explorers when they came here. When the Spanish explorers came here, they had interpreters. And all these interpreters were black. How could you have an interpreter interpreting the Indian language unless they already were speaking the language prior to coming over here? But see, that's another one of the myths. But it's very important to understand this because when you understand that when Columbus came here, he found black people, he found African people, and he called these people Indians not because he thought he was in India. He called them Indians because they were black, just like the South Indians. And so we find that is that the first Indians that the Europeans encountered in the Caribbean and the Indians that they encountered when they landed on the North American shore were of black tribes. In fact, black tribes, black Native American Indians, they dominated the United States from Canada in the east all the way down to Florida. And they also had extensive black Indian nations from the eastern shore to the Midwest. And then we also had a lot of black people in Canada and West Canada, Oregon, Washington, and stuff like that. Because we find that most of the Mongoloid Indians, they began in a sense to migrate from the Southwest across into the eastern lands, Midwest, and others. Okay, when these Mongoloid Indians came, what they did in a sense is that they became affiliated with many of the black Native American tribes. You see, and what happened is that you often, when you look at the relationship, you often have Mongoloid tribes and African tribes that have the same names, and that's because of the fact that these Mongoloid Indians have been adopted. You see. And so this is one of the things that caused one of the problems, and that really makes it very difficult when you're talking about a cultural approach and possession of a social and cultural and economic character that's different from the rest of society. Because when you go before the court to try to fight to get our reparations, we have to prove that we possessed a social, cultural, and economic character that was different from the rest of the society. Now, this is the kicker, and this is where you have to be very careful and why we need a little bit more research, is that we know that when the European came here, they decided right away that they were going to deal with the black Indians different from the Mongoloid Indians that they met later. The first thing they did with the black Indians is that they asked to come and share their land. And then after they came to share their land, They would often, in a sense, invite them to gatherings and parties and things like that. And then they would enslave them. And so we find that many of the black nations, their land was stolen after a war with Europeans. And after these wars with Europeans, most of them were sold into slavery. The main slave port for these black Native Americans was Barbados, you see. But the thing they did is that they would mainly send the men and keep the women. For example, you hear a lot about the first Thanksgiving. They never talk about the second Thanksgiving, because during the second Thanksgiving, when the black Native Americans came to sit down and share a meal with the Europeans, they were poisoned. And those that weren't poisoned were set upon, murdered while they ate. Yes, murdered. And those that weren't murdered, they captured them and sold them to Barbados, you see. Our interactions with Europeans has been an interaction which has always been deadly. And because of the fact that this relationship has been one of war and deceit, it makes it difficult for some people to really understand our relationship, because they never really wanted to allow us to express our native or indigenous character. They always wanted to identify us as simply blacks because of their confrontations with blacks in Europe. You see, Europeans have a long hatred for black people. And one of the reasons they have a long hatred for us is that we ruled them for so many years. Yes. The first black people went into Europe in 700 AD. These Muslims came from Senegal. Do you know what Senegal is? It's in West Africa. These black people came from Senegal in 711, and they stormed into Iberia or Spain or what we call Portugal, and they conquered these lands. And when they conquered these lands, what they did is that they expanded these black territories all the way from Iberia into Germany. Yes. Yes. This is where they gained their hatred of us, because they hated the fact that we practiced a superior culture. And this superior culture was one that made them become jealous and afraid of us. As these black people, in a sense, continued to rule in Spain and Portugal, because of the fact that there had been a relationship between Africans in Africa and Africans in North America, some Europeans began to discover that there was a new land. But this wasn't exactly a new land. They knew the land existed, and they knew they were already trading with blacks. I mean, even when Columbus came to America, he mentions these black people moving up and down the coast selling tobacco. Yes. There is no mystery. The only mystery that black people are not indigenous to the Americas is the fact that they hide this history from you. They've hid this history from us to make us live in a dream state. Yes, it's almost as though we didn't really exist. But when you hear about the various tribes, the Yamasis, and other black tribes in North America, we always hear about these people during the process of confrontation. Okay, but let's look at this idea. Whenever you approach the government for reparations, you have to show how your social, your cultural, and economic character is different from the rest of the society. This makes it very difficult for us because American society has been constructed off an African, Black, Native American, indigenous culture. The foods that they eat in America, they got it from us. The music they play, they got it from us. You see? It came from our indigenous nature. But the European denies that we are indigenous because of the fact that they want to claim that everybody came here from Africa. And granted, at least about 10 or 20 million sub-Saharan slaves came to the Americas from Africa. But when they came to the Americas, African people were already here. And what made it so bad is that, as I told you, as early as the second Thanksgiving, black people were being enslaved on the plantation. You see? They saw Indians growing tobacco, so they said, we're going to grow tobacco, but we're lazy, so we're going to have somebody else do it. So you know what they did? They took those black Native Americans and they put them on the plantations. You can go right now. After this talk, I want you to go Google tobacco and growing tobacco and the slaves and on the plantations in the tobacco fields. And you're going to see black Native Americans. They were the image of these tobacco plantations, you see, because of the fact that they learned to grow their crops from these black Native Americans. You know, when I was growing up, my father, he was from Mississippi, and I love my old man. I miss him every day, like any other adult. You have problems, but my old man always tried to teach me two things. He tried to teach me how to hunt, and he tried to teach me how to be a farmer. And I'll be honest with you, I wasn't too much of the farmer, and I'm not too good with guns. But you know, every Saturday, my father, when I was growing up, he'd take us out into the suburban areas of Chicago, and he would grow squash, beans, and corn, and tomatoes also. And at the end of around August, he'd go and collect all this, plus some little okra, and we'd come back and we'd take it home. And my mother would can the tomatoes, and we would have the tomatoes throughout the year. We'd have the corn and stuff. But I didn't even know at that time, because see, my parents had all my mother, grandmother always taught me that we were part Choctaw. But I didn't really worry about being part Choctaw because I was just a nigger at school. But the point is that my father grew squash, he grew corn, and he grew beans. And do you know what those things are? That is the Three Sisters. The Three Sisters is the name of the plants that black Native Americans grew: corn, squash, and beans. And there it was that growing up, that's what my father taught me, that you're supposed to grow. You see? He still had this connection to the land that our forebears had before the European got here. And he carried that on when he came up here to the north, you see? Because that part of Mississippi that we came from was mainly Choctaw territory. And his ancestors, I looked it up, and my father's father was brought there by the Winters family, Vintors. But he had still picked up the Choctaw stuff, I guess, from my grandmother and mother's side of the family. But again, as I said, that shows that that's a cultural tradition. That shows a relationship that we had with the land, and we continue to have that relationship with the land. That is unique to African people. White people, when you go to a white farm, white people are cultivating what's the most popular crop that they could sell. When they first got here, they said they could sell tobacco, so they grew tobacco. Later they grew rice, and then finally they grew cotton. But due to my indigenous heritage and your indigenous heritage, our people continued to grow what they had grown for millennia. And that was corn, squash, and beans. That's a cultural tradition that we have. Very important. Could you show the slide from Seneca Village?
Okay. It is the top one. That is that's the New York one.
Yes.
Okay. All right. That should be. Oh, I have it labeled Seneca Village. Yes. I'm going to download it for everyone to see it. So everyone should be able to see that the Seneca Village slide. If you don't, you should have it on your computer as a download that we just sent. So bring that up, if audience, if you have that slide. This is the Seneca Village slide. Go ahead, Dr. Winters.
Okay, well, this is Seneca Village. Many people don't know that Seneca Village was a village that was occupied by black Seneca Indians. It was also a few Europeans that moved into the area, and there was also some ex-slaves in the area. But it was a village that was formed by black Seneca Indians. But if you Google Seneca Indians today, they're not going to show you one black person. You see, because they refused to acknowledge their Indian heritage. You see, a Mongoloid Indian brother talking about, hey, what about the treaties? Palefaces didn't make any treaties with black Native Americans. When you lived in an area, they just took it. That's what they did to Seneca Village. This was a town that black Seneca Indians had lived in for hundreds of years. And they took it away. And when they took it away, these people had nowhere else to live except in maybe other ghettos in what we call New York City, Manhattan today. See, you have to understand this. Is that the European has constantly been trying to take away our connections to the land. But luckily, when you study history and when you investigate it, you begin to see that we did have these connections, but the Europeans, they severed these connections and just said, hey, you're not a Native American, you're a colored person. You're a colored person. And they use this whole idea of colored person to be able, in a sense, to make it appear that indigenous black people had no connection to the land. They were just a bunch of colored people from Africa. And this is important, you see. Could you put up the slide of Chappaquiddick?
Yes.
Martha
Okay.
Vineyards?
Okay, that should be okay. Okay, audience, that I'm going to put up that slide. That should be Clyde 2. Okay. All right, audience, I'm downloading that slide for you, and you should have that. And that's of Martha Village, the Chappaquiddick Indians. Go ahead.
Okay. You always hear about all the big shots going, the Kennedys, that young singer. They're always going to Martha Vineyard. That's where the rich folks hang out. But that wasn't always the playground of the rich. That was a black Native American community. But again, when the Europeans saw that they were having a beautiful location, a fine place to live, the Europeans just took it over. Just like they took over Seneca Village. You see? They never acknowledged that these people were black Native Americans, because if they acknowledged that they were black Native Americans, they would have had to, in a sense, pay them money. But they have always felt they don't have to pay us anything. But that's why we're going to make sure that they cut the check and give us back the land. You see? Because you can't keep getting away with this. No, we're not going to. There's some treaties, and we're going to do some research to get those confirmed too. But the relationship that we've usually had with Europeans in relation to what was our land is they just took it. They didn't try to they didn't try to buy a lease, you see? And so then it's very difficult to really show that we retain legal title. That's why most of our conflict in the courts is going to be based upon this whole idea that who was there first and when did they take it? You see? And so when an Indian comes up to you and when a Mongoloid Indian comes up to you and say, well, where's the treaties? There were no treaties, but that was our land. And we're going to get it back. So we see in a sense is that if you're going to look at indigenous jurisprudence, you have to look at it from the perspective of the relationship that Europeans had with the African descendants, you see, in the Americas, as opposed to the others. So we do have a spiritual relationship to the ancestral territory. You see, even up to this day, there's many people in New York City who will tell you that their ancestors lived in Seneca Village. You see, my family has always taught us that we were Choctaw. You see, Bill Gates of Harvard University, he's made a big deal about, my parents said they were Indians, but the genetics showed that I have white ancestry. He's a fool. And you know why he's a fool? He never did the research himself, but he would know that the R haplogroup is an African haplogroup. And in fact, most of the haplogroups carried by Europeans are African haplogroups, but they play a trick with you if you don't study it. And that's why I study, and that's why we're going to do more research. Okay, the second thing, in a sense, is that you constantly see, and hopefully they'll put up the slide that shows the increase in the free the free black population.
Okay.
What you see throughout the
You want to put that
19th
up?
and yes, put that up, please.
Okay. All right. I'm putting this up for our audience. This is uh Clyde. Uh must be Clyde 2. Okay. All right. All right. I've done that and I've downloaded it for everyone so that you should be able to see it or bring it up. Go ahead, Dr. Winters, please.
Okay, look at these totals. Look how the increases. They almost would double. They would almost double within a few years. And the reason that they doubled is that every time they would take away land from indigenous black people, from our black Native American ancestors, they would just label them free blacks or colored folk, their favorite term, and then just toss it away. But no, that was our land they took. Our ancestors deserve a right to get that land back. We do have an ancestral relationship to the land, and that's one of the reasons why my father, now he's with God on the other side, but my father, that's why he taught me about our indigenous culture when he taught me that you're supposed to grow maize, squash, and beans because those things will help you to survive, and they were a natural diet. And this was our ancestral diet as indigenous Africans in America. So, to sum things up, we do have a spiritual relationship with our ancestral territories. Granted, we were forced during slavery off of our lands into our colored communities, or we were on the plantation. Remember, the slaves on the plantations, when they caught a black Indian, they took that black Indian, put him on the plantation. That's why so many of us have this African indigenous ancestry, because of the fact that many of our ancestors made it on those plantations. You see, this culture that we call the United States culture is our culture. The music. You don't see Europeans eating chicken except from over here, and they got it from us. You see, corn, okra. See, yes, we have a culture, but our culture has been taken away from us just like our land was taken away from us. And Europeans have begun to call our culture, our land, theirs when it's not. And we can prove it, and we're going to prove it. We're going to prove it because we have the research now, the genetic research, the historical research. We got to clear it up, we got to clean it up, and we got to get more, and we're going to do that if we can get support from those people who want to see our true and our actual history. We were not always slaves. This was our land. Haven't you ever wondered why the European hates us so much? Haven't you ever wondered why he doesn't feel sorry that he brought all these people from Africa and he put them on a plantation and he beat them and he whipped them? You see, he doesn't feel sorry for you because he knows, yes, millions of us came from Africa, but the vast majority of us were indigenous. And because he knows you're indigenous, every time he looks at you, he knows that he owes you. He owes you for the land he's taken. You see? And because he owes us reparations, he's going to play that Africa thing up forever so you can go back to Africa. Why the hell should I go back to Africa? My ancestors were also indigenous here. We came from Africa, and do you know what? That's my ancestral home. Africa is my ancestral home. Africa is where the ancient ancestors came from. But my heritage is indigenous American. We were here first, and we will be here in the end. Did you have any questions, Doctor?
Well, I'm just in awe. I just love to hear your conversation because you are our top expert, and I just uh the questions that we have are additional questions on land. We'll resolve that through our additional research. But a lot of the things that you talked about that we can prove is the fact that we were here first. And actually, that's as lawyers, that's all we need. So we're just so happy to have you as our expert. Um, so that satisfies us and satisfies the legal standard that we can show these evidences and proofs. So I don't have any further questions at this time. I'm satiated, so I'm fine. I'm fine. I think did I leave? I hope I left the chat open. Let me just make sure. I'm going to check on it to see if. Oh, here we go. Um, okay, Ray, Abuka, Melvin, Robin. Uh, okay, they're just saying hi. Okay, if any of our audience has any questions, let me know. Uh, but the I'm fine. I'm still kind of processing. Uh, I'm processing some of the things that you said because it fits so well into the legal arguments that it appears that even what we have now is unassailable, but we want to make sure that we have more than an abundance of research so that we can explain our territory from the Canadian border all the way down to where Mexico meets.
Florida.
Yes, to Florida, so that we can, because a lot of times reparations is localized as to what harms we did in certain states and in certain areas.
Okay. Well, see that's one of the biggest problems in terms of this localization for the indigenous and relationship to ancestral lands. As you know, two things have prevented us from really having or maintaining our connections to the land. Number one, we had an involuntary loss of our land when they put us into slavery,
Hmm.
Black Native Americans into slavery, and then secondly, in 1800, during the interstate trade, many of the indigenous Afro Americans that lived in the north and in England, New England, and also in the Midwest, they were forced to become slaves in the deep South. You see, but even
Hmm.
though many of them was forced into the deep South, let's take Mississippi for example. It was a very important state for cotton, and we find that many indigenous people Afro-descendant indigenous people were forced into Mississippi, but there were also already some black people there, and these people were mainly Choctaw, black
Right,
Choctaw.
right. That's what our research says as well.
Yeah, and the most
Uh,
important thing. Go ahead.
we had Brother L is talking about the doctrine of discovery. And I would just like to say, Brother L, Abuka L, is that the doctrine of discovery has been refuted. That's a Caucasian uh, um, invention so that they could keep the land that they so-called discovered. But as Dr. Winter said, they didn't really discover anything. We were here for thousands of years, hundreds plus thousands of years, and we had maps And we even took them to the land and navigated them to the land with the maps that
That's
we
right.
had. So the doctrine of discovery is not going to be applicable. We can uh, um, we can overcome that as well. Oh, we have Angela Millett. She's a chiefess from the five from the Freedmen tribes in Oklahoma. She's been one of our, and she's a historian as well. So I know she loves to see you and hear what you're saying, because your research, of course, um, um, it confirms a lot of our research who have been looking in the area. So she gives you a greeting, a greeting to
Hello.
you, Dr. Winters. Um, but Brother L, don't worry about the doctrine of discovery. We're not going to have any problems with that in the international court. And I don't even think that they'll bring it up. And it may not go to some of the issues will go to some of the forums, but our research, and the research is so plain that I doubt that the case will go to a court. It will probably, and this is how reparations really occurs, and we set it out in our legal treatise on reparations. And because, like I said, when you have a really sound legal case where there's really very few facts uh, in disputes, the facts are uncontroverted, the other side really don't want a trial, and so it's usually handled a different way. And the Jewish Holocaust case was handled a different way because there was quite a lot of evidence of the harms that Germany and Poland did, and so it bypassed the court system, even though it was first launched in the court system, and it ended up in the international settlement of banks. So, which is in, I think it's in Switzerland. The International Settlement of Banks is in Switzerland. So we may start this case in South in Costa Rica. This is where the inter-American systems are that have jurisdiction over these matters, and they've handled a lot of indigenous matters all across the Americas. And in fact, we are late in bringing this action before them and presenting this action before them. That's why I was so delighted to have Dr. Winters and Dr. David Imhotep as the experts, because we're late. There's about 90 other claims of various Afro-descendants, and this is one of the, in fact, it was Dr. Winters and Dr. Imhotep that convinced us to change our name from African descendant to Afro-descendant, because it was a more precise explanation about who we
Right.
were, and we did that. So what our matter will probably end up at, and is a troop of us doctors and experts and our lawyers and our researchers will probably be able to settle a lot of these land claims all across the Americas. And so this is what we view as the end game to reparations. And I'm so glad that we have the doctor here and our doctors and our evidence, because many of the reparations organizations, even though they know the harms and they're doing a great job as publicizing the issues of reparation, this is the end game. This is where the rubber hits the road when we talk about, well, what is the remedy? And the remedy has to be a land remedy, and it has to be an authority. We have to have our liberty back that they took from us, the colonizers taken from us. So this is going to be a process of us going through this, and then eventually ending up in these negotiations where our experts, Dr. Winters and Dr. David Imhotep and our other experts would, if they would want to challenge their expertise, this is when they would unveil and reveal what Dr. Winters has just revealed somewhat in a capsule to our audience here. And this is why we're so glad that he's here. And we're going to put this is going to go to YouTube. We want everyone that's listening to send it to as many of their family members and relatives and friends as they can.
That's
Because,
right. But
yes,
it's very
go
important
ahead,
also
Doctor.
to understand that some of our land is so valuable today that the Europeans aren't going to want to allow us. For example, Chicago. That was
Yes.
first occupied by Jean-Baptiste Pont du Sable and Black Native Americans.
Mhm.
See, therefore, in addition to Europeans giving us lands, we've already went through that, getting all of our reparations via land. They're going to also have to cut a check. And the reason they're going to have to cut some checks is because of the fact that they're not going to let us take back Chicago. But when they cut the checks, we can use that to buy land that can be very profitable land. You brought up the sister living out in Oklahoma. Look how
Yes.
many of those communities were given to the black freemen and the black Native Americans out in Oklahoma, and then the Europeans went back and took it. They took it.
Mhm.
See, they took it. They took it back. That means that we had to be smart. We not only had to get the land, we also had to get a check too, so that when we buy the land, we can have legal title to these new lands, so they can't come back and they can't take it. You see, Europeans are always being slick. You see what they did to the Mongoloid Indians. We can't be like the Mongoloid Indians. They failed because the fact is this is that they didn't really understand. We're
Right.
coming at this at a point in time where we know how the European operates. He is an Indian giver, but we can use the law to get our reparations and get back what is ours.
Well, the good thing, and you're absolutely correct, and this is the reason why we're using this approach, because we're in a great system, which is the Inter-American system, and they're very familiar with these cases. From Brazil, there's a 250 million Afro-descendants, by the way. And during this week on social media and Facebook and our ads, we're going to show you Afro-descendants from Ecuador, from Uruguay, from Paraguay,
Colombia,
from Colombia, from Honduras. All of these are Afro descendants, and so the court that we're going into has already defined us. They already know about us, and so our arguments for the land rights, even in Chicago, and our approach to Chicago, believe it or not, Dr. Winters, is going to give us the land on the south and the west side of Chicago, because we have a strategy for that. The strategy in America's republic, is built upon this so-called democracy. So in our majorly populated areas, we put an election apparatus, for example, on the south side and the west side of Chicago, and we call the people to vote on two questions: are they indigenous? Do they recognize themselves as indigenous people? And two, do they want to be their own authority in Chicago? If they answer that in the majority, then that is what it is. That's why election apparatuses are put up, is to decide consent. The transfer of land and the right to land is based upon democracy, which is consent, which is a vote. So this is our strategy for all the majorly populated areas in the United States. This is why it's going to be such an interesting case, Dr. Winters, because we have 1,200 majorly populated cities in the United States. So as many election apparatuses that we can place in those areas before the people, if they vote in the majority that we are indigenous, and we are erecting this authority, we withdraw from your authority, we're going to do a test case in Detroit. Then what this does is that vote transfers the land. And when you vote and assert your indigenous rights, it's a permanent thing. It's not a 4-year thing, which there's going to be another vote. No, when you assert your indigenous right, and with your evidences and other people's evidence that we showed that we have indigenous accoutrements on this land, and this is our land, then it's going to be very interesting in Chicago, because Chicago has a $6 billion a year budget. And the south and west side of Chicago take up about 34% of that budget, which is about $2.4 billion. So it's going to be very interesting in Chicago.
Yeah, it'll be even more interesting because once we're able to show ads on TV and really present the history of
Yes.
black indigenous Afro-indigenous people in Chicago, see, then they can, when they
Ah,
vote, they'll be able to really be able to see, aha,
understand. Hmm.
that's something that's going on. And see, that's what the European has denied to us. That's why they like to put people on like Gates and of Harvard University and other people so they can deny our indigenous heritage so that
Yes.
they can make sure that they never had to face this. Do you know what? What's happened is that they hid our indigenous heritage from us for so many years, and now they're afraid. What's happened to them is that we finally know through the
Hmm.
research of some of the ancestors, Du Bois, Ivan Van Sertima. And see, they laid the groundwork that allowed
Yes.
me and Dr. Imhotep to really get into the research and really deal with it. And now we can demand
Yes.
reparations because, hey, you hid it from us, but we know the truth now. We know it.
That's the key. Is that that's why I'm so happy to have you with us, Dr. Winters, because you are the one of the major players, and I know you've been laboring for all these years, and I'm telling you, it didn't go in vain. And I know that you see now the fruition, that you'll see the fruition of your work, and you're going to be put on the pedestal, historical pedestal that you should be for as an excellent researcher and as an excellent historian to bring these evidences to bear. And I'm excited because I see, as a lawyer, as an international lawyer in this thing, I see evidence excites me. And so when I see the evidence that you have presented, and I see the evidences that we see in Oklahoma. I've been working with Sister Angela Millett and the Indians there. And I see what the evidence is that they have, and the evidence from my own research. It's just exciting to be able to now be able to take this challenge and win this case for our people. And because of the books that you've written, they can't erase it. And because of the books that we've written, we can't erase it. And what we did, and because of the filings that we've did, we filed in the United Nations already. And I just want to put, and I know you can't see this card, but I went to the United Nations, Dr. Winters, and our audience in New York, and I met this very interesting brother there. His name was Chief Sackham. And reason why I'm putting this up is because when you put the slide about Chappaquiddick and the Martha Vineyard area and the Indians, this brother is the chief, his ancestral chief of that area. He's from the Matakessit tribe. And the Matakessit tribe is from Massachusetts. Massachusetts. The name comes from Massachusetts, Matakessit. And he's from the Matakessit tribe. And we were in the United Nations at the Permanent Indigenous Forum, where all of the indigenous tribes from all around the world go to, and they talk about indigenous rights and indigenous resources. And we had a great time in New York. And so I'm going to call him right after this, and to talk about confederating our tribe, which is the Afro-descendant tribe. We have about 6,000, close to 6,000 citizens in our tribe right now. And I want everybody that's listening to make sure that if you don't have those declarations, to make sure you get them in, because that enhances our ability to bring this case. And so we're going to confederate, and we've confederated with the Black Indian tribes and Angela Millett's tribes, the Freedmen tribes from Oklahoma already. So this is a great awakening period, and I'm so glad that your last book was, I'll put
We are
it.
not just Africans.
I love that. Okay, that title is so explanatory. We are a lot more we are actually Afro-descendants, and as you mentioned, we're also African descendants. And in fact, our ancient ones were the African descendants that the Afro-descendants and the different populations waves came from.
Yeah, and,
Go
and,
ahead.
and it's very important also to understand for the freemen out in Oklahoma is that, they wanted to say all these people were former slaves. They weren't former slaves. They belonged to various black Native American nations that just joined up with the Cherokee. The Cherokee, I hate to say it, the Cherokee they have been some big sellouts, mainly because I guess a lot of them married Irishmen. Because
Right,
my
right.
wife, my wife's great grandfather is an Irish Cherokee. And so, but the point is this: is that they've always sold us out. The Cherokees sold us out during the Yamasee War. In the 1700s, the Yamasee were almost about to push the Europeans out of Georgia and the Carolinas, and the Cherokee turned on us. When those black Native American tribes, when they were adopted by the Cherokee, they started labeling them as slaves so they could make Europeans think that they had been slaves, and they weren't slaves. Many of the freemen in Oklahoma belonged to black Native American tribes who just joined or became affiliated with the Cherokee, and the Cherokee sold us out. You see, and that's why every time you find a black Cherokee, a white Cherokee, a Mongoloid Cherokee, you find in a sense a black Cherokee, a Mongoloid Choctaw, a black Choctaw. You know why? Because we adopted them, we brought them into our tribe, and then they sold us out to the European. And I don't like to just say that, but it's the truth. You see, it's the
No,
truth.
yeah.
We have, I'm sorry to say this, the the American descendants of slaves, the Afro-descendant indigenous people, we have no friends. We have no friends because everybody is jealous of us because we're so creative. You see? We're so creative that everything we do, they try to steal it. And they steal it successfully and then even fool us and make us think we don't have any, opportunities, or we don't have any self-esteem. So those freemen, you brothers and sisters out there in Oklahoma, really research your history, the history of the black tribes that were already in Oklahoma and the Southwest, and research those people when they did join the Cherokee Nation before the Trail of Tears, and you're going to find out some amazing things because your history did not begin as a slave.
Mhm.
Your history did not begin as a freeman, quote unquote. You were just some colored people, that copper brown Native American, who they just wanted to say wasn't Negro African. And there's nothing wrong with being Negro because I'm proud to be black. Because I'm so proud of my heritage. I'm proud of what my father taught me about my culture as an indigenous American, and I will never forget that. I'm proud my mother told me I was Choctaw. See, my wife is proud that her great great grandmother, couldn't even speak English because she was still speaking the native tongue.
Mm.
But even today, we don't speak English. We speak Ebonics. You know why we speak Ebonics? Because we have what's called a substratum in our language that's African. Do you know that most of the Indians, and you brought up Massachusetts, most of the Indians there used to speak the Mandi language. So when they
Now
brought
that's
slaves over,
interesting.
yeah, and the Mandi, and when they brought slaves over there from Africa, and they brought them to Massachusetts, they were speaking Mandi. Do you
Now,
know that do you know that there's traditions of the Moors
mhm.
also having a nation in Massachusetts? Massachusetts was a black heartland. See, but you have to know the history. You have to know the real genetics, not that genetic bull that they spring on you and they teach you every day because they lie every day, and they have to lie because they have to use genetics phonetics the man controls to make you feel that you have no history. You have no relationship to the land. Yes, we have indigenous relationship to the land. We have a spiritual relationship. Even though they took our ancestral territory from us, we've always tried to maintain our heritage. And that's the Three Sisters. We have a cultural approach. That's the language we speak, that's the music we play, and that's the foods we eat. The European didn't give it to us, baby. It came from our indigenous people.
You know, I'm so glad you said that, Dr. Winters. You know, this video that we're doing right now, for everyone that's listening, is going to go directly to the UN Human Rights Commission. And I'm going to tell you why. About 3-4 weeks ago, Susanna Sandoval wrote me, and she's on this list, so she may be listening, or she's definitely will get a copy of this, and I'm going to send it to her, because we're going to open up the discussions on how they can aid this effort that we have, and so your explanations I'm going to attach to an email and send to Ms. Sandoval at the Human Rights Commission, so that she can see that we and she'll understand that when change comes, it comes from the masses and the doctors. The people in the middle are kind of waiting for us to see where this is going to go to, but the masses we have, because they're tired. And then the doctors, when the doctors get involved in it, and the doctors are getting involved, audience, in this. These are our most learned elders, our most learned amongst us. When they get involved, when we get involved, without the colonial headset, it's a powerful thrust. And so I'm so glad for your explanations. And Massachusetts, like I say, the chief sachem is opened my eyes too. In fact, he still spoke the language. He still knew the culture. And as you know, from and we talked about some of how the inter-American system looks at us as Afro-descendants, as well as indigenous people. And we're different because we're both Afro-descendant as well as indigenous. And their connotation of Afro-descendants is just that fourth population wave of the transatlantic population wave. That's really what they define as the Afro-descendants. And but your research is going to open their eyes, so they'll see that we just didn't come in that fourth population wave, that we've always been here.
Always.
So we're African descendants as well as Afro descendants. So we're both. And so that's the reason why I'm so excited about your explanations and the research and the evidences that we have, because it would even show the United Nations that we're not just Afro descendants, we're both.
Yeah. And see, and that's the most important thing, because see, you have to make sure, and this is how it's a tricky game, you see. But the trick is on them. And the trick is on them is that your organization and the history and the scholars before us, they've already opened our eyes.
Yes.
We are not just Africans. We're not just Africans. See?
Yes.
And the whole point is this, is that we are more, much more.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why they hate you. And that's why they're jealous of you. Because you're so creative, because we were able to take our African heritage, and we took our Black Native American heritage, and look at what a beautiful culture we have today.
Mm-hmm.
Our music dominates the world. Mm-hmm. Our dress dominates the world, and even our language. Every time you look up, there's still a language from us. See? Why? Because you are a unique people. You are Afro-descendant indigenous Americans.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And
Well,
people, they're jealous. But if we unify, and see, that's how the white man tricked us. When the white man came over, it was so many black tribes that they put this tribe against that tribe, have us fighting each other, sell those brothers down in Barbados or Jamaica, and then in a sense get the Mongoloid Indians to side with them to come and hurt us. And so, see, you got to stop that division. We will never have full unity. We will never have full unity because we're tribalistic. But I guarantee you that if the vast majority of us come together and we fight for our reparations, we fight for what they owe us, we'll get it. I
yes.
never thought that I would see a black president. Granted, Barack Obama was not an Afro-American. He was an African-American. And so he, you know, he sought those ideas of his Africanness. But we're Afro-Americans. Our roots lie here. My mama, my daddy, your mama, your daddy.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't come from Africa and they didn't come from Europe like Obama's. We are indigenous. See? And do you know what? By the grace and mercy of God, we will conquer anything and everything. And just like they thought they would never see that African president, I really truly believe that in my lifetime, we're going to get full reparations.
Yes,
And not
sir.
only are we going to get land, but they're going to cut that check.
Oh, well, the evidence is there for us lawyers. We're excited because when the law and the facts come together, you win. So, with the law being what it is, saying that indigenous people have superior title to land, they don't even need treaties, they don't need titles, they don't need anything because they were already here. That's their title. Is their skeletons that's in the ground. It's their ancestors. That's the title to the land.
And not
So
only that, but remember, the courts always say you have to have that spiritual relationship with the ancestral territory, which we have. And you got to also have that culture. And that's why when we go into the inter-American courts,
yes.
we have to make sure that they know that. And that's why we're doing research. And we're going to do even more research to tighten it and make it so tight, they're not going to be able to get out of that.
Well, you heard it. Well, you heard it from Dr. Winters. This particular episode is going in front of. We're going to attempt to put it in front of our money people, our our celebrities, our scholars, our business people who've been struggling with who they are and who we are and our condition. They will see that we have a way out of this by being who we are. So we are going to do this, and we are so happy that you joined us today. We are at our time limit. We're so happy that you joined us today, and we want you to make sure to go on YouTube, get the link, give the explanations to your friends, to your families, get the word out that there is an end game to reparations. It's been defined. We have a remedy, and this is what a lot of the groups was looking for, was a remedy. And as far as the tribalism, we have a structure called a confederation. So we're going to reach out to adults, we're going to reach out to the Pan-Africanists, to the Muslims, to the Moors, to the Christians, all of us who are Afro-descendants, so that we will not have any division amongst us, that we'll have because we need a concentrated effort, because we're talking about billions and trillions of dollars. We're talking about a whole episode of life that is going to be open to our children, and their grandchildren forever. Will be able to close that circle that has been taken from us, and our land rights and our spirituality and our culture that's been taken for us. And so we're ready to go, people. So stay behind us. We're there for you. We're going to do our best to bring this into fruition as quickly as we can. So we thank you so much. I thank you so much, Dr. Winters, for that elucidation. That was beautiful. I know this is what you do and what you've been doing. So we really appreciate you, brother. And we're looking forward to working with you and bringing this thing into where it's supposed to be and where it is now, which is in the United Nations. And so thank you so much for coming in. Thank you, audience, for coming in. Don't forget to spread the word. It's going to go directly to YouTube probably in about 15, 20 minutes or so. And so make sure that you get the link out maybe an hour, because I have to label it as the second part of the series. And do come back for the rest of the series. This is going to be explosive. Thank you, Dr. Winters. I will be looking forward. Thank you, sir. We'll be looking forward to working with you. Thank you, audience, for joining us today. Thank you so much. We'll be back next Saturday, and we're going to sign off for now. So thank you so much, sir.
B1, black first, black first.
Thank you, sir.